Docker has become a standard tool for DevOps as it is an effective application to improve operational efficiencies. In this course, we'll explore several use cases where and how developers leverage the power of Docker and its tools to maximize your time spent coding versus setting up DevOps. Hi, I'm Andy Henry, and I use Docker for nearly all of my programming activities. It's my pleasure to help you discover how it can be beneficial for you. First, we'll go through the initial setup and an overview of Docker's basics that you need as a developer. Then, we'll explore how you can use Docker when developing front-end, back-end, or full-stack projects. Next, we'll implement a continuous integration approach to Docker and development. And finally, we'll review how you can manage multiple services with Compose and also provide a brief overview of swarms and Kubernetes. So if you're ready to take a plunge with Docker, fire up your favorite editor and let's get started. In this course, we'll go over a brief overview of the concepts and installation procedures for Docker to get you up and running quickly. So you don't need to have any prior experience with Docker, as we'll cover the basics needed as a developer. Also, I will be using a Mac on this course, but feel free to use Linux or Windows as the process is the same on all platforms. When you look at why Docker was created and why it is popular, it is mostly for its ability to reduce the amount of time it takes to set up the environments where our applications run and are developed. Just look at how long it takes to set up an environment where you have a Node and Express API for backend, which also needs Mongo, and then if you add your applications or front end, you may need to set up several pieces there too. And that's just the start. Then, when your team grows and you have multiple developers working on the same front and back end, and therefore they need to set up the same resources in their local environments for testing purposes. How can you guarantee every developer will run the same environment resources, let alone the same versions? All of these scenarios play well into Docker's strengths, where its value comes from setting containers with specific settings, environments, and even versions of resources, and simply type a few commands to have Docker set up, install, and run your resources automatically. And more often than not, much faster too. And these are the scenarios we'll cover in this course. So let's go briefly over the main components. A container is basically where your application or specific resource is located. For example, you could have the Mongo database in one container, then the front-end React application, and finally your Node Express server in a third container. Then you have an image, which is from what the container is built. The image contains all the information that a container needs to build a container, exactly the same way across any systems. It's like a recipe. Then you have volumes, which holds the data of your containers. So if your application are on containers, which are static and unchanging, the data that changes is on the volumes. And finally, the pieces that allow all these items to speak is networking. Yes, that sounds simple, but understand that each container in Docker have no idea of the existence of each other. They're fully isolated. So unless we set up networking in Docker, they won't have any idea how to connect to one another. So let's get started with Docker. So the first thing you need to do is installing Docker. And it's a very simple process, and just go to the main website, which is docker.com. And once you get there, there's a button that says Get Started. Click on that button and then scroll down until you see the Docker desktop. And then select the operating system you're on, download, and then install. Once you have that installed, you should see a whale logo or icon here, and that's basically Docker running. So if you see Docker desktop is running, that means that you're good to go. The other thing that I would recommend is to create an account and then make sure you log in with your account, because we are actually going to use some of the things that require you to sign in. So once you have that set up, let's move on to the next step. Also, most of our applications require a MongoDB database. So just to make sure, and if you want to test them as well, make sure you follow the instructions to install MongoDB. So how do you find them? You go to Google and you type MongoDB Community Edition, and then go to install MongoDB Community Edition. So once you have all this installed in your system, you're good to go. So let's take a look at what you have for the simple application. So let's go into the exercise files and then click on resource. And basically what you have here is 3 applications. You have one, which is a simple backend. The other one is a simple front end, so basically a React application. And then you have a full backend. And these are basically the applications that we're going to leverage for the course. We're going to start with the simple backend here, and we're going to leverage these applications with Docker. So if you want to explore them, this is the first application. It has a very simple database connection and an initial start of a server. Then you have the React application. If you're familiar with React, this is what it looks like. And finally, you have a full backend, which is basically an expanded version of the simple backend. But on this one, you actually have controllers, models, and routes, and all that jazz. Also, feel free to use your own applications. The goal of this course is not to learn how to build backends and front ends and these applications. The goal of this course is to learn how to use Docker with your applications. All right, so now that we have all that set up and are ready to go, let's move on. If you're looking for a crash course on Docker, this video and the next one is perfect for you, as we'll quickly put a Docker image and a container by using the backend project in the resources. So let's get to it. So the first thing we're going to do is create a brand new folder inside of our desktop and leverage the project that we have in the exercise files. So let's open the exercise files. Let's go to resources and then the simple backend. And I'm going to create a brand new folder right here. And I'm going to call this backend. Perfect. And then what I'm going to do is copy the files from the simple backend, like so, and then paste them inside of this new backend here. Perfect. And close all this. And then we're going to open VS Code. In this case, if you're using anything else, that's fine as well. And I'm going to create 2 new files in this project. One of them is going to be Docker Ignore. And Docker Ignore is basically the file that tells you what you don't include in the container. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to create the file, and I'm going to call this .docker ignore, like so. And then I'm going to basically add the node modules. I don't want to have those in the Docker file because it's going to automatically install them. So I don't want to include them if they're already there. And also the npm debug.log. Okay, so once we have that, we can save, we can close that file, and then we're going to work on the most important file for that project, which is the Docker file. So basically, the purpose of a Docker file is to create an image based on the instructions of your Docker file. So let's go ahead and create that Docker file, like so. And let's make sure we install that. Perfect. So I'm just going to close that. And now that I have a Docker file, and let's go back here. I wanted to show you guys that because there's an extension that helps you when you create the Docker file. So it kind of does a little bit of the suggestions and things like that when you create your Docker file. So install that extension if you're on VS Code. And if you're not, then install any tools that could help you with a Docker file. So once we are in the Docker file, we're going to go ahead and do the instructions for the image. So basically, every instruction that we'll include in that file will tell Docker, create an image from this, and then from the image, we're going to create a container. So what we need is node first, and then we're going to create a work directory and iCaps for everything, by the way. Well, not for everything, but at least for the instructions. And then the directory where we want to place all this. Finally, we want to copy the package.json file to our main directory. Then we want to run npm install. So we install all the dependencies that we have in our project, basically installing what's in here. Then we want to copy our directory from here to the actual directory of the container. So what does that mean is I have a file here, and I would have other files if it was a larger project. So what you're doing here is asking Docker to copy the content of your application into the new container. Then finally, we want to expose the port that we need. So in this case, it's port 4000. If you don't know which port we're exposing, you can look into the index.js. In this case, it's right here. And then finally, we're going to run a command to run the application. And this is basically going to type the npm start command. Okay, so basically what we just did is create the file that will give the instructions to the image to create the image. And then from the image, we're going to create a container. And what you're looking at are the instructions. So let's move on. Okay, so now that we have a Docker file created for our test project, let's go ahead and create our image from it and test it. So the first thing you need to do is to make sure that Docker is running. So if you don't have that whale icon right here or wherever it is on your system, and when you open it, Docker desktop is running, make sure that it runs and that it's green. Once you have that, also make sure that you're signed in and you're good to go. So let's go ahead and open up a terminal inside of VS Code or whatever is the editor that you're using, or you can open up your own terminal separately. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and click on terminal, new terminal, or the shortcut Control-Grave. And the first thing we need to do is use the instructions that we have from our Docker file and create an image from it. So basically, take all of this and create your image. So let's go ahead and do that. So how you create an image is simple. So you do Docker build and then -t to name your image. And we're going to name it, well, at least me, I'm going to name it this way. So algo fields / simple backend. And you can name it anything you want. And once you're done, place a dot at the end. That's very important. Otherwise, that command is not going to work. So now what it's going to do is download the node image and then run every single command of your Docker file and create your image. Let me just clear that up so I have a little bit more at state. So now if we want to check, do we have an image created? Let's go ahead and do Docker and then images. So this is going to list all the images that you've created. In this case, we have just one. And if you want to manage anything inside of Docker, you always use the IDs. So the images have an ID, the Docker containers have an ID, and when you want to manage them, you use the image ID. So let's say, for example, you want to delete this image, you would do something like Docker RMI, and then the image ID. And you can enter just the 4 or 5 first characters of this image, and then you would delete it. I'm not going to do that, but if I wanted to delete this image, I would literally hit enter and this image would be no more. Now, how do you run a container from this image? It's a very simple command. Again, how you do it is basically Docker. Again, always start with Docker. And then what you do is run. Now we need to specify the port. So in this case, we're passing port 4000 from the container to the application. So 4000, 4000. And then you want to tell it which image you want to use. So algo fields, simple backend. And as soon as you hit return, it's going to start your application or start your container from the image that you created. So basically, we're going to see the server running as if we were just running it locally. Now, if you want to manage this container, stop it, or do anything else, you need to open up another terminal. So I'm basically going to open a second window here. and I'm going to list the containers to see if my container is there. So the way to list containers is docker ps. So as you can see, I have this container ID, which is simple backend, and it's running on these ports, and it was created 24 seconds ago. So if you want to stop this container, you can do docker stop and then name the container. And if for some reason, sometimes the container doesn't want to stop, or it has a process with another container, you can also do docker kill and then with the actual Docker ID. So I'm going to do docker stop, the FEE. And if it lists the FEE or the ID of your container, that means that it stopped. So if you want to check it, you can do docker ps. And as you can see, it's no longer running. But if you have any issues, again, the docker kill command is very useful. So now another command that you can use from time to time is docker pull or docker push. So if you're connected to your account here, so in this case, Algo Fields, I could actually push an image to Docker Hub. So I could do docker push and then the name of the actual image. And you can also docker pull the